Good morning, or depending on when you're watching this, good afternoon, good evening, or good night. My name's Ross from PTCG Radio, and I'm back with another winning deck breakdown. Regionals have started in the US, and when Pokemon tournaments start back up again, we have winners from Pokemon tournaments, and in this series of winning deck breakdowns, I show you a deck which has seen success, and I explain to the best I can. It's unfortunately going to be my deck, and I'm going to show you the best I can. Now, this deck comes from, and I do apologise for the pronunciation here, Ahmed Amra Abrahim Ali, who went to 20th place at Houston Regionals. He went undefeated on day one with 5 wins, 0 losses, and 4 draws. His wins came across a Mega Heracross deck, a Landorus, Lucario, Seismitoad, Mewtwo, Garbodor deck, an Yveltal deck, and a Landorus, Lucario, Seismitoad, Mewtwo, Raichu deck. His draws came across against a Pyroar, Seismitoad, and a Pyroar, with intentional draws filling out his other 2 draws. We don't need to say what decks they are against. Now, with these winning deck breakdowns, I can only really use decks which have been put into the public forum, but hopefully when we get UK regionals coming around, some of the regionals will hopefully be my friends who will be willing to release their lists, and I can show you their lists in this series. But starting off, we have Ahmed's list from Houston Regionals. He went undefeated in day one, so it's worth looking at. Now, in the podcast in the last couple of episodes, by which I mean 115, and as long as you're not listening to this too soon after I record it, 116, I've been talking quite a lot about Yveltal making a comeback, and that's what we see here. This is a standard format deck, not an extended format, and we can see quite clearly it is based around Yveltal. Yveltal EX has been for some time, and will remain for some time, one of the best attackers in the game. He's got his first attack, Evil Ball, which does 20 damage, plus 20 more damage for each energy attached to your active and the opponent's active. So let's say there's 2 energy on the opponent's active, maybe it's a Seismitoad with a DCE. There's 2 energy on Yveltal, it's doing 100 damage, and then you can add to that with Laser, you can add to it with Muscle Band, or you can just put more energy onto Yveltal. But you've also got Y Cyclone, which is the attack you're going to be wanting to use more often than not. This does 90 damage for a Dark and a double colourless, and then it allows you to move an energy. What you can do a lot of the time is use Yveltal EX to do 90 damage, and then move a DCE onto a benched Yveltal or other attacker, and that's going to do absolute wonders in conserving energy as well as doing damage. Now, because we're playing 4 double colourless, and I assure you we are playing 4 double colourless, that means there are some tech Pokemon we can use. Mewtwo EX has been around for a long time. We can't use Side Drive, but we can use X-Ball. Now, X-Ball is exactly like Evil Ball, but it doesn't do the extra 20. It just does 20 times the damage attached to both active Pokemon. And this isn't really in for its own sake, this is in as a counter to other Mewtwo's and to stuff like Lucario, which might also be Psychic weak. You're not putting Mewtwo in there to just do big damage as your main attacker, that's what Yveltal is there for. But Mewtwo is there to win the Mewtwo War, or to take on an opponent's Lucario, or indeed any other Pokemon you come across that is weak to Psychic. Plus, of course, Mewtwo DCE gives you a very nice turn 1 attack for if you're struggling, and it will actually donk some stuff, especially with something like a Muscle Band. You can do 60 on turn 1 and donk a load of low HP basics. Now, we've also got a Seismitoad here. There is a single Seismitoad in this deck, and again, you can't use a second attack, he's in there just for the first Quaking Punch. One of the biggest things that's happened to Yveltal decks recently is they've lost Dark Patch. Dark Patch being the trainer which allows you to attach a Dark energy from your discard pile to one of your benched Dark Pokemon. We no longer have that in standard format, so sometimes we need to slow the game down while we build up some attackers, and Seismitoad's Quaking Punch does that. The 30 damage isn't going to do a huge amount of use, and having only one Seismitoad isn't going to allow you to use Seismitoad all of the time, but it's going to allow you to slow the game down at times in order to buy yourself a bit of time, get your attackers going. It's not perfect by any stretch of the imagination, but it's a nice little alternate strategy. And of course, it's really nice against things like Landorus, which are weak to water. Now, the other Pokemon we've got here really for attacking with the DCE is Raichu. Pikachu's there just to evolve into Raichu. As a quick side note, we use this Pikachu because Nuzzle can paralyze on a coin flip, and that's always a useful thing to do. Raichu is in there for its attack circle circuit. If you can fill your bench, it does 100 damage. It does 20 damage times the number of your bench Pokemon. 5 bench Pokemon, 100 damage. This is in there for, well, I mean, it's pretty good to be honest, against a bunch of stuff. But it's got some uses over others. And the 3 main ones are, it can one-hit Lugia EX with either a full bench, or 4 Pokemon on the bench and a Muscle Band. It can one-hit KO an Yveltal with the same parameters, or indeed if you've got 3 bench Pokemon Muscle Band Laser, or 4 bench Pokemon Laser, assuming of course you don't have a Verbank down, which then screws the maths up just a little bit more. Raichu is there to kill fighting weak Pokemon, the 2 most prevalent of which, shall we say, are likely to be Lugia and Yveltal. But he's also your Pyroar counter. If we have a look at this deck generally, it's all basic Pokemon except for Raichu. Pyroar is immune to attacks, or immune to damage at least, from basic Pokemon. So what this will allow you to do nice and quickly is to be able to take down Pyroar. Now Pyroar's got 110 HP, but if you had a Muscle Band or a Laser, even without Verbank City Gym, that will add up to 110 or 120, assuming you've got a full bench, and that will KO the Pyroar. The DCE also allows you to run Charizard EX. Again, we're not using the second attack there, but we're using Wing Attack. 60 damage for free colourless energy. Now this is not a perfect attacker, which is why we only use Run. One of them, sorry. But it's good against Frizzy and Genesect. Now the 60 is annoying, because time we add a Muscle Band onto that, it does 80 damage, which times 2 for Grass Weakness is 180. And both Virizion and Genesect have 170. So 160 for Charizard, 170 HP, you don't quite get the KO. Now Virizion, remember, has an ability which blocks special conditions to Pokemon that have Grass Energy attached, so you cannot use Laser to add the extra 10 damage unless there's either no Virizion on the field, or the Pokemon you're attacking has no Grass Energy attached. Regardless of that fact, doing 160 for free energy, or 120 if you don't have a Muscle Band, is still very, very good. It's not ideal, but it's a good Pokemon against Frizzy and Genesect. It's worth running one. In the same way we're running 1 Mewtwo, 1 Seismitoad, it's worth running 1 Charizard. It's not going to be used every game, it's not going to win you a ton of games. What it is going to do is give you an out in certain games when you need it. And finally, well actually no, there's 3 Pokemon left. I say finally, it's not final by any stretch of the imagination. We have Spiritomb. He has an ability saying that each player cannot play any Ace-Spec cards from his or her hand. This is a fun little deck to play. Excuse me, a fun little tech to play. Just generally, if you've played your Ace-Spec, which in this deck is a computer search, this is a fun little card to drop just to screw over your opponent. You might not necessarily need it, but it's quite good. There'll be games when you want to fill up the bench just to use Raichu anyway. So he'll be good as an extra attacker on the bench. But this is mainly in there for Virizion and Genesect. Virizion and Genesect is going to want to attach a G-Booster to their Genesect in order to do 200 damage and KO your EXs. Spiritomb stops them playing down an Ace-Spec. Now what they can do is gust up Spiritomb, maybe by using Genesect's red signal to bring it into the active, but that of course means that they're having to waste an attack killing a 1 prize Pokemon. Spiritomb's not an EX, it only gives up 1 prize, so that works in your favour. It does also have an attack called Hex Mirror, which, if anyone remembers Professor Oak's new theory, it's kind of like that a lot of the time. Think of it instead exactly like Copycat, because it's actually more like Copycat, in that it's Copycat. You shuffle your hand into your deck and you draw a number of cards equal to the number of cards in your opponent's hand. This is an attack you'll use maybe once or twice a tournament, but it's going to be nice to get you out of a dead hand. The other 2 Pokemon in the deck are also here purely for their ability. We'll get to Yveltal regular in a minute. Jirachi, you can't use his attack, but he's got the ability Stellar Guidance. Put it down on your bench, search for a supporter, and in this build, you need to be able to do that. Darkrai, now you can attack with Darkrai. Night Spear is a good attack. Night Spear for free energy does 90 damage to the active, 30 to one of the bench. And this is best for setting up double KOs. So you can KO with the damage to the active and the 30 damage to the Pokemon on the bench. This is not an attack you're going to want to use often because fighting Pokemon are swarming the competitive scene at the moment, and Darkrai is weak to fighting. But you'll use it every so often. More likely, this Darkrai is going to be used for his Dark Cloak ability, hence only playing one, which will give free retreat to any Pokemon that have Dark Energy attached, which is going to be a lot of them. Say, for argument's sake, you've got an Yveltal active with a bunch of damage on, you use Y-Cyclone, move a double colourless to a benched Yveltal, and then you can free retreat it next turn using Darkrai's ability. Now, that does mean that between Spiritomb, Darkrai, and Jirachi, you are relying on a bunch of abilities here, so Garbodor can be a bit of a pain. The one Pokemon I haven't mentioned yet is Yveltal, and somewhat strangely, there are 3 of them in this deck. This really is at the heart of this deck. I've already mentioned how Dark Patch has been rotated, and the first attack is 30 damage plus a Dark Patch. And essentially what you do is you use Yveltal to pick away, do a bit of damage, and attach energy to benched Yveltal. If you can build up 2 or 3 Yveltal on your bench with a bunch of damage so you can be Y-Cycloning and then doing big evil balls for the KO, you will win the game. And again, I'm not the person who made this deck, but if we look at the build of this deck, that's basically what's going on here. The person is using free regular Yveltal in order to set up the benched Yveltal EX. Spiritomb is in there to screw over some people, and all of these things may have secondary uses, but essentially, Darkrai's in there for free retreat, Spiritomb's in there to stop G-Booster for Virizion Genesect, Charizard's in there to attack Virizion Genesect, Raichu's in there for Pyroar, the Mirror Match, or Lugia, Jirachi's in there to get supporters, Mewtwo's in there for the Mewtwo War or Lucario, and Seismitoad's in there, maybe for water-weak Pokemon, maybe to slow down the game, to build up Yveltal. Which also fits with what I'm talking about with regular Yveltal. Essentially, this deck aims to build up Yveltal and go for the attacking. And if you look at the counts in this deck, that's clearly what this deck is going for. Now, there's 2 other things working in Yveltal's favour. 3 other things, in fact. A resistance to fighting, which Yveltal EX also has. This is wonderful, ladies and gentlemen, given how much fighting there is in the format at the moment, as previously discussed. Secondly, 130 HP on a 1-prize non-EX is surprisingly annoying. That bad boy is quite hard to take down. He's probably going to live for a turn or 2. Thirdly, he's got this attack doing 100. Now, if you flip tails, you can't attack next turn, but remember, Darkrai gives you free retreat with Dark Cloak, so you can just retreat and attack with something else. You don't really want to be putting free energy onto a non-EX to attack with, but it's possible. This also is a good attacker against something like Sigilyph or Suicune, which has a safeguard ability blocking attacks from EXs. You've got Raichu for that, but this gives you another option. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is the Pokemon lineup. In terms of energy, we have 8 Darkness Energy, which is standard, and 4 Double Colourless Energy, because we're not able to play any more than 4. Now, this deck is wonderfully teched out, in that it's got a lot of answers to a lot of different things. Now, this deck did go 5-0 and 4 on day 1. It also ID'd twice. That's an intentional draw, where you and your opponent choose to draw and don't actually play the game out fully. What I would say is, although it didn't lose, it didn't play any Virizion Genesect. It didn't play any fully Seismitoad focused lists, although I reckon this would beat it. Didn't play any Plasma lists. It didn't play any Speed Lugia lists, etc, etc. So this deck is not one that has necessarily beaten everything in the format. We are taking a deck that did well at one tournament. And although I love the Pokemon line in this deck, I have a big problem with the supporters. And this is something that on my YouTube channel and on my podcast, PTCG Radio, you've heard me talk about a lot. Supporters. For Juniper, he actually played Sycamore, but I refused to play Sycamore Juniper all the way. 4 Juniper, 3 Chorus, 3 N. That is 10 draw supporters. 10 draw supporters is not enough. You will draw dead. Now, he has gone for Computer Search as his A spec, which can function as a supporter on turn 1, but it means you've got to discard 2 cards and use your A spec. We also have a Jirachi there, which does function to get you a supporter, but Jirachi doesn't work under ability lock, and Garbodor is everywhere nowadays. Jirachi doesn't work if you start with it, and there are a large number of basic Pokemon here. There are, in fact, 14 basic Pokemon, so the chances of starting Lone Jirachi are small, but you've still got a chance of starting Jirachi. It's going to happen every so often. Even if you start with another Pokemon... Actually, if you start with another Pokemon, you can put it in your hand, sorry. So, if you start Lone Jirachi, it's not going to happen all the time, but it's going to happen occasionally. Sometimes Jirachi is also going to be prized. So if Jirachi is prized, or you start Lone Jirachi, or you're under ability lock, Jirachi doesn't get you a supporter. If you're under trainer lock, Computer Search does not get you a supporter. If your Computer Search is prized, etc. And if those things happen, then you're down to 10. I don't like the amount of supporters here. What I do like is, we have got Spiritomb that can get you a new hand, and we've got Jirachi that can get you a supporter, and we've got Computer Search which can get you a supporter. So although I fundamentally disagree with the fact that we've only got 10 supporters, I know Lysandre is a supporter, I don't count it as such, because it doesn't get you new cards. It's a supporter, I suppose I mean draw supporters here. I don't like the fact that this deck is low on draw supporters, and I think that could potentially be a problem as we go through a long tournament. There are going to be games where we draw dead. And it's not going to be every game, it might be once or twice in a tournament. But it could be under very bad situations. You may have 1 or 2 bad games, and then you have a game or 2 where you draw dead, and all of a sudden, you're out of top cut entirely. So, it's something that I would caution against. I love this deck, I love a lot of the counts, it's why I've chosen to spend, 25 odd minutes, 20 minutes going through this on my podcast channel, but I would caution you against playing a deck exactly like this for that reason. It worked out in this tournament, but there's probably a myriad of other players who played similar decks and drew dead too often. Going through the rest of the list, and all I see is stuff I like. 4 Hypnotoxic Laser, brilliant, it's a wonderful card, everybody knows how good it is. Automatic Poison, 50% chance of sleep, it's amazing. 2 Verbank City Gym to put the poison damage from 10 up to 30. It's not ideal to only play 2, playing 3 or 4 would be better, but for space constraints I think 2 is probably the optimum in a deck like this. 4 Muscle Band, again I love Muscle Band as an amazing card that does 20 more damage, and you're going for quick, hard hitting in this kind of deck. You can do big attacks with Yveltal, but you're going for hard hitting, you really need the Muscle Bands. It helps with Raichu, it helps with Charizard, it helps with Yveltal, Mewtwo, Seismitoad, etc. If you're slowing down the game with Seismitoad, you would much rather be doing 50 damage per turn than 30 damage per turn. So that's all really, really good. I love the 4 Ultra Ball. We don't have a better Pokemon Search card, and this goes for anything in your deck. So again, I'm fully in with that. 1 Palpad, I am absolutely a fan of, putting supporters back into your deck. You can reuse Lysandre or any of your draw supporters. If everyone's got big benches, you put 2 Colress back into your deck. If you're miles ahead, you put Juniper back into your deck, and if you're miles behind, you put N back in your deck to give yourself up to 6 Ns in a game and completely screw over your opponent. 2 Lysandre, I'm a big fan of this. It allows you, this is a gust effect I was talking about earlier, it allows you to grab one of your opponent's bench Pokemon and change it with their active. Again, this is fantastic, and playing 2 of them with a Palpad means you're going to get 1 or 2 of them off per game. Playing 1 Professor's Letter, I like this, I'm not such a fan in a deck like this, purely because we're not playing Skylar. That could easily just be another Dark Patch. What it does allow you to do, I suppose, is if you draw Professor's Letter, you can use that to search for 2 Dark and then put them in a discard with either Ultra Ball or Computer search, meaning you can get 2 in the discard rather than 1, which of course means that you can attach it using regular Yveltal's Oblivion Wing attack. I don't know that you need it in a deck without Skylar, but I still kind of like it anyway. 1 switch, you need switch. You've got free retreat with Darkrai, so you don't need many switching cards, but you'll need a few for if you're asleep or paralysed, with special conditions. Or indeed, if someone's playing a Snorlax and stops you retreating. 1 escape rope, I love this fact that he's got 1 escape rope, 1 switch. Escape rope forces your opponent to switch their active Pokemon, and although they get a choice, it can still be incredibly frustrating that they've got to put something else active. 1 Max Potion is the only card I believe I've yet to talk about, and again, I love having 1 Max Potion in there. It's a lovely little tech card which allows you to heal your Pokemon, and having Darkrai for free retreat, and having regular Yveltal to reattach Dark Energy, means that Max Potion is going to be less of a pain. You can free retreat an Yveltal for an Yveltal EX for an Yveltal. Play Max Potion to get the hopefully 1 Dark Energy that's left on it, because you've Y-Cycloned the rest of the energy. And then you can use a regular Yveltal to Oblivion Wing the freshly discarded Dark Energy onto another Pokemon. I love all the choices made in this deck when looked at as individual choices, but I think collectively I don't necessarily like the consistency of this deck. I'm made very nervous by the fact that there is only 10 draw supporters. I think the Max Potion could go, I think a Muscle Band could go, maybe a Verbank City Gym could go, and maybe one of the Pokemon could go. And then that would put you up to, 13 or 14 draw supporters. Plus the Spiritomb, Jirachi and Computer Search, and then I would feel very confident that I'm not going to draw dead. But this is something I've talked about a lot, and this is a deck which you are going to be discarding, you're going to be benching a lot of basic Pokemon, so you're going to be running through your deck hopefully fairly quickly. For anyone who's thinking of putting this in the comments, Palpad does not count as a supporter because it gets you late game supporters, not early game supporters, and although it will very much help your late game consistency is irrelevant when you draw dead and lose in the first few turns. We've all had those games. So that's my opinion on this deck. That is my rationale, I believe, for the card choices that have been made. If you've got any further questions, if you disagree with anything I've said, make sure you drop a comment down below. Make sure you like this video, make sure you subscribe if you haven't done so already, and if you have subscribed, go find someone else to subscribe. It'll be fun. Think of it like that Google whacking thing Dave Gorman did, or Pay It Forward, that terrible old film with Haley Joel Osment when he was still an adorable little child. I will, of course, in the very near future, probably in a couple days, be posting up a game or two with this deck where we will see if it is indeed inconsistent or whether I've made a big fuss about nothing. One thing I would like to point out right before I go here, this was a deck which was successful at a large US regionals event. That doesn't happen altogether by luck. It's clearly a good deck, and my reservations about the consistency are from my own experience playing for several years at, sometimes at least, a fairly high level, and the fact that consistency can be king. This deck is very teched out, but this is the kind of thing that does well at big tournaments sometimes. You play a risky deck, and maybe you'll draw dead and it'll go terribly, or maybe, just maybe, you'll end up in a situation where these techs will win you the game. Thank you very much for watching. My name's Ross, and you've been watching PTCG Radio.